Lena Fairchild never imagined that the man who had taught her to trust the world, her father, Thomas Fairchild, would become the very one to shatter her reality. As Sheriff Walter Graves dug deeper into the shadows of Ashford, he uncovered a chilling truth that tied Thomas to a series of dark secrets, leading to a shocking revelation that would forever change the quiet town. Was Lena's disappearance truly a mystery, or was it the tragic result of a father's desperate attempt to bury his past? On a foggy evening in early autumn, the small town of Ashford, nestled along County Road M, found itself enveloped in an unsettling silence. The air was thick with mist, and the winding road seemed even more desolate than usual. It was a typical evening, with the last rays of daylight slipping behind the horizon, casting long shadows over the fields that stretched endlessly on either side of the road. Yet, something about this night felt different. Lena Fairchild, a well-known schoolteacher, had just left her friend Emily's house, a mere mile from her own home. It was a short drive, something Lena had done countless times, but tonight she wouldn't make it back. Lena was in her early 30s, with a kind smile and a gentle demeanor that made her beloved by everyone who knew her. She was a fixture in the community, always involved in local events, from school plays to charity drives. On that fateful evening, she had spent a few hours at Emily's house, catching up over a cup of tea, as they often did. There was nothing out of the ordinary about the visit, and nothing to suggest that Lena's life would be forever changed that night. As Lena drove down County Road M, the mist closed in around her, making the road even harder to navigate. Her headlights cut through the fog, casting an eerie glow on the trees that lined the path. Her car, a weathered sedan, hummed steadily as it rolled down the road. But just past the old barn, something went wrong. The car was found abandoned in the middle of the road, the engine still running and the headlights flickering weakly against the thick fog. There were no signs of a struggle, no skid marks, nothing that would indicate an accident. It was as if she had simply vanished. A neighbor who had been out for a late evening walk discovered the car and immediately called the sheriff's department. Sheriff Walter Graves, a man who had lived in Ashford his entire life, was quick to respond. When he arrived at the scene, his heart sank. He had known Lena for years, watched her grow up in the town, and never in his wildest dreams had he expected to be investigating her disappearance. The car was locked, her purse and phone were gone, and there was no sign of Lena anywhere in sight. The only clue was a small set of footprints leading away from the vehicle, heading toward the barn. But as the sheriff and his deputies followed the trail, they found nothing but the same eerie quiet that had gripped the town all evening. The fog thickened as the night wore on, and the search for Lena intensified. Volunteers gathered from all corners of the town, combing through fields and forests, checking abandoned houses and barns. Yet, despite the effort, there was no trace of Lena. The night dragged on, and as hours passed, the town's hope began to fade. By morning, the search had become a grim routine, with no new leads emerging. Sheriff Graves, a man known for his level-headedness, couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. This wasn't a simple case of a missing person. There was something more at play here, something sinister. In the days that followed, the town was gripped by fear. Lena's disappearance became the topic of every conversation, and rumors began to spread like wildfire. Some claimed to have seen a shadowy figure lurking near the barn the night she disappeared. Others whispered that the road itself was cursed, that the spirits of the past haunted County Road M, luring people to their doom. These tales, though steeped in superstition, began to take hold of the townsfolk. Even those who didn't believe in such things couldn't help but feel the weight of the mystery pressing down on them. Sheriff Graves, however, refused to entertain the idea of the supernatural. He focused on the more practical aspects of the case. He started questioning Lena's friends, family, and colleagues, trying to piece together any small detail that might lead to a breakthrough. But each inquiry seemed to yield the same result. Lena had no enemies, no known conflicts, no reason to run away. She was loved by all who knew her, and the idea that she might have just disappeared voluntarily seemed impossible. And yet, there she was, gone without a trace. As the days turned into weeks, the community began to lose hope. Ashford, a town that had never experienced anything even remotely close to this, was shaken to its core. The once vibrant streets now seemed empty, the usual chatter replaced by an eerie silence. The disappearance of Lena Fairchild would linger in the minds of the townspeople for years to come. A mystery that no one could solve, a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit together. 2 weeks after Lena Fairchild's mysterious disappearance, the small town of Ashford had been gripped by an overwhelming sense of dread. The days passed, but there were no new leads, no sightings, and no answers. Sheriff Walter Graves had tried every avenue, exhausting every resource, but nothing brought him closer to uncovering the truth. The people of Ashford, once filled with hope, were now losing their sense of security. The town that had once felt like a safe haven was now a place where fear lurked around every corner, especially along County Road, M. Then, one morning, Sheriff Graves received an unexpected call. A local farmer, Jerry Daniels, had found something peculiar while out in his fields. It wasn't uncommon for Jerry to stumble upon strange things during his daily work, but this was different. He had been walking near the old barn, just a few hundred yards from where Lena's car had been discovered, when he noticed a small piece of paper half buried in the dirt. It was an envelope, worn and stained by the weather, but its contents were legible. When the sheriff arrived at the scene, Jerry handed him the envelope with a look of confusion. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper with a message scrawled in uneven handwriting. The note read, "The answers lie beneath the ground where the old oak tree stands." There were no other markings, no signatures, just that one cryptic sentence. Graves stared at the note, feeling a chill run down his spine. The words seemed to mock him, offering a clue but no real direction. The oak tree mentioned in the note was one of the oldest in the area, located in a dense forest a few miles from the barn. It had always been there, a towering figure in the landscape that the locals often spoke of in hushed tones. Some said it had witnessed countless secrets over the years, and now it seemed as though it might be holding one of its own. Graves immediately set out with his team to investigate the oak tree. As they arrived at the site, the fog had begun to settle once again, shrouding the area in an eerie atmosphere. The old oak stood at the center of a small clearing, its gnarled branches reaching into the sky like twisted fingers. The ground around it was soft, damp from the recent rain, and the air was thick with the scent of earth and decay. The sheriff's team began to search the area, carefully digging around the base of the tree. At first, they found nothing but roots and dirt. But then, as one of the deputies, Jack Peterson, shoveled a little deeper, his spade hit something solid. The team quickly gathered around, excitement and apprehension building as they cleared the dirt away. What they uncovered wasn't a body, as they had half expected, but something far stranger. A broken, tarnished necklace. It was small, delicate, and unmistakably familiar. The sheriff recognized it immediately. It was the necklace that Lena had always worn, the one with a small pendant shaped like a bird in flight. The discovery sent a wave of shock through the team. If Lena had been wearing the necklace when she disappeared, why was it buried here, beneath the oak tree? And why wasn't she with it? The sheriff stood in silence, staring at the broken piece of jewelry, his mind racing. The discovery only deepened the mystery. It didn't make sense. If someone had taken Lena, why would they leave her necklace behind? And if the necklace was planted here as a clue, then why would it lead to this tree? Everything about the situation felt wrong, and Graves couldn't shake the feeling that they were being played, like someone was leading them on a twisted, deliberate chase. They dug deeper, hoping to find more answers, but the ground was hard and unyielding. After hours of searching, the sheriff called off the excavation, but the sense of unease lingered. The necklace didn't offer any answers. It only raised more questions. Who had placed it there, and why? Was it a sign that Lena was still alive? Or was it a message from someone who wanted to make sure they never found her? With nothing more to go on, the sheriff returned to the station, his thoughts clouded with uncertainty. The note, the necklace, and the old oak tree, everything seemed to be leading him in circles. But one thing was clear. Someone knew something, and they were doing everything they could to keep the truth hidden. As the fog rolled in once more over County Road M, Sheriff Graves knew that the town's darkest secrets were yet to be revealed, and he would stop at nothing to uncover them. As the search for Lena Fairchild continued, Sheriff Walter Graves found himself increasingly consumed by the case. The discovery of the necklace beneath the oak tree only deepened the mystery, and every lead seemed to circle back to the same unsettling question. What was the connection between Lena's disappearance and the cryptic note? Despite his best efforts, Graves could not shake the feeling that the answers lay somewhere buried in the town's past, a past that no one seemed eager to talk about. It wasn't long before the sheriff started to look into the history of the area, searching for any connection to the old oak tree, the barn, and the strange events surrounding Lena's vanishing. The town of Ashford had always been a quiet place, known for its picturesque landscapes and close-knit community, but Graves knew there were things hidden beneath the surface. He turned to the town's archives, digging through old newspapers and records, hoping to find something that could shed light on the mystery. What he uncovered surprised him. There was a story, one that had long been forgotten, about a notorious criminal named Harold Wicks. Wicks had lived in Ashford decades earlier, before the sheriff's time, but his name still lingered in the town's whispered conversations. He was known for his involvement in several unsolved crimes, including theft, smuggling, and even murder. But despite his violent reputation, Wicks had managed to evade conviction, his crimes mysteriously going unpunished. It wasn't until after his acquittal that he disappeared from Ashford entirely, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Graves's curiosity was piqued. Could Harold Wicks have had something to do with Lena's disappearance? The sheriff dug into Wicks's history, the more parallels he began to see between Wicks and the current mystery. Wicks had always been a master of manipulation, able to slip through the cracks of the law. It was said that he had buried a stash of stolen goods somewhere in the area, and that no one knew the exact location. Could Lena have stumbled upon the hidden cache? Or was someone trying to keep the truth from coming to light? The sheriff's investigation led him to the old barn where Lena's car had been found. The barn had always been a local landmark, used by farmers for storage and occasionally for town gatherings. It was a place that had witnessed many events over the years, but there was something about it that felt different now. Something that didn't sit right. Graves had his team conduct a thorough search of the area, hoping to find any clue that could connect Wicks to Lena's disappearance. But as they combed through the barn, they found nothing but dust and cobwebs. It was then that the sheriff began to consider another possibility. Someone in the town was involved in Lena's disappearance. The more he thought about it, the more it seemed like the people closest to Lena might hold the key. Her family, her friends, and even her colleagues, any one of them could have been hiding something. Graves turned his attention to Lena's circle, beginning with her family. Lena's father, Thomas Fairchild, had been a prominent figure in the town for many years. He was well respected, having served as a local businessman and philanthropist. But as Graves looked deeper into his background, he discovered that Thomas had a history that was far less clean than he had let on. It turned out that years ago, Thomas had worked closely with Harold Wicks, both men involved in illegal dealings that had been swept under the rug. Graves learned that Lena's father had been involved in the burying of Wicks's stolen goods, using the old oak tree as a marker for the stash. The sheriff's suspicion grew. What if Lena had discovered something about her father's involvement with Wicks, and that was why she had disappeared? Sheriff Graves decided to confront Thomas Fairchild, hoping to get some answers. But when he arrived at the Fairchild estate, he was met with resistance. Thomas denied any connection to Wicks or to Lena's disappearance, his demeanor defensive and anxious. The more Graves pressed him, the more Thomas's story seemed to unravel. He grew increasingly erratic, his once polished facade beginning to crack. It was clear that something was amiss, but whether it was guilt or fear, the sheriff couldn't yet tell. As the investigation unfolded, new details came to light that suggested Thomas's involvement in the cover-up of Wicks's crimes. It became evident that Lena had been unknowingly drawn into a web of deceit that stretched back decades. Lena's discovery of her father's past may have been the very thing that had led to her abduction, and Thomas's attempts to protect her from the truth had only served to bury her deeper in a mystery she couldn't escape. Sheriff Graves found himself at a crossroads. The more he uncovered, the more complex the case became. Was Lena's disappearance a result of her father's past coming back to haunt him, or was there something more to the story? As the sheriff pieced together the fragments of information, he realized that the town of Ashford had more to hide than he could ever have imagined. And with each new revelation, the line between friend and foe blurred, making it even harder to trust anyone in the town. The truth, it seemed, was slipping further out of his reach. Days passed, and the investigation into Lena Fairchild's disappearance continued to spiral deeper into a maze of confusion and uncertainty. Sheriff Walter Graves felt as though he were chasing ghosts, each new piece of evidence only serving to complicate the case further. Thomas Fairchild's increasingly erratic behavior raised the sheriff's suspicions, but there was still no solid proof to tie him to his daughter's disappearance. The mystery seemed to be growing darker with every passing moment, and the sheriff's frustration was mounting. He knew the truth was out there, hidden somewhere within the town's shadows, but finding it felt like searching for a needle in a haystack. Then, in the midst of the growing tension, an unexpected witness came forward. Clara Voss, a reclusive woman who lived in a small, dilapidated cabin deep in the woods near County Road M, had avoided any kind of public interaction for years. She was known in town as an eccentric, a woman who kept to herself and rarely ventured into the community. Her cabin was tucked away from the main road, isolated from the hustle and bustle of town life. But Clara had witnessed something that could be key to solving the case. Clara had heard about Lena's disappearance, of course, though she had never been one to gossip or involve herself in town matters. That all changed when, one night, she found herself out in her garden, looking up at the stars. The air was still, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was then that she saw a figure moving toward the old oak tree near the barn. The figure was dressed in dark clothes, with a wide-brimmed hat that obscured their face, making it impossible for Clara to identify them. But what struck her the most was the boots they were wearing, large, heavy boots that seemed out of place in the quiet woods. Clara had been a keen observer of the people who passed through the area over the years, and she knew that these boots were familiar. Clara hadn't been sure what to make of it at the time. She hadn't thought much about the figure until later, when the news of Lena's disappearance spread like wildfire through the town. Only then did Clara realize that the person she had seen that night could have been connected to Lena's fate. The boots were unmistakable. They matched the description of those owned by Elliot Harrow, a local man with a reputation for trouble. Elliot had been a fixture in Ashford for years, known for his short temper and run-ins with the law. Although he had never been charged with anything serious, his reputation had always been tarnished by rumors of his involvement in various shady dealings. Clara had seen him in town countless times, but this time, something about him had seemed different. The thought that he might be connected to Lena's disappearance unsettled her, but she had been too hesitant to come forward until now. Sheriff Graves listened intently as Clara described the figure in the woods, taking careful note of every detail. Her description of the boots and the figure's movements was precise, and Graves immediately recognized the potential importance of this information. He decided to confront Elliot Harrow, hoping to learn more about what Clara had witnessed. Elliot's home was on the outskirts of town, a dilapidated farmhouse surrounded by overgrown weeds. When the sheriff arrived, Elliot was sitting on the porch, staring out into the fields, his face hard and unreadable. Graves approached cautiously, introducing himself before getting to the point. He asked Elliot about the night Lena disappeared and whether he had been anywhere near the old oak tree. Elliot's response was immediate and dismissive. He denied having anything to do with the disappearance, insisting he had been home all night. His alibi seemed solid. He had been alone in his house, and no one had seen him leave. Yet something in the way he spoke didn't sit right with the sheriff. Elliot's defensiveness felt too rehearsed, his answers too quick, as if he were trying to cover up something. Graves pushed further, asking Elliot about his boots. The sheriff was careful not to mention Clara's description, but he could see the subtle shift in Elliot's demeanor when the topic was brought up. Elliot's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of guilt on his face. He quickly recovered, denying any connection to the boots and dismissing the sheriff's line of questioning as absurd. Yet, despite his protests, the sheriff couldn't shake the feeling that Elliot was hiding something. With no concrete evidence to implicate Elliot, Graves was forced to let him go. But the encounter left the sheriff with more questions than answers. Could Elliot have been the one to abduct Lena? Or was he simply a bystander in a much larger, more dangerous game? The sheriff's instincts told him that Elliot knew more than he was letting on, but without proof, there was little he could do. The deeper Graves dug, the more entangled the web of lies and secrets became. As the investigation continued, the sheriff couldn't help but feel as though he was being led down a path of misdirection. Clara's witness account had brought him closer to Elliot, but it also raised new doubts. If Elliot wasn't the one responsible for Lena's disappearance, who was? And what role did Lena's father, Thomas Fairchild, play in all of this? With each passing day, Sheriff Graves grew more determined to uncover the truth, no matter how many twists and turns the case took. The closer he got to the heart of the mystery, the more dangerous it seemed. And yet, he couldn't stop. He knew that the answers he sought were just out of reach, hidden behind layers of deception that he had yet to unravel. Weeks had passed since Lena Fairchild's disappearance, and Ashford was starting to lose its fight to maintain its once peaceful facade. The community, once a bastion of close-knit camaraderie, had splintered into factions of suspicion and fear. Sheriff Walter Graves, who had been tirelessly working the case, now felt as though the town itself was suffocating under the weight of the unanswered questions. The clues he had uncovered so far, Clara's witness account of Elliot Harrow's suspicious presence near the old oak tree, Thomas Fairchild's erratic behavior, and the cryptic note, had only led to more confusion. Each piece of evidence seemed to tie Lena's disappearance to someone else, but none of it formed a coherent narrative. The sheriff knew he was missing something, some critical piece that would finally make everything fall into place. It was a cold, rainy evening when the breakthrough came, not from an unexpected witness or a hidden clue, but from a phone call. Sheriff Graves was at his desk, staring at a wall covered in photos and notes about the case, when the ring of the phone shattered the silence. It was Deputy Jack Peterson on the other end, his voice tense. He had found something. The sheriff's heart raced as he listened to his deputy's words. Peterson had been reviewing surveillance footage from a nearby gas station, footage that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. On one particular night, the night Lena vanished, a vehicle had been caught on camera leaving the station just moments before Lena's car had been found abandoned on County Road M. The vehicle was unmistakable. It was a black SUV, a model that Sheriff Graves had seen parked outside Thomas Fairchild's house on several occasions. The sheriff's instincts flared. He told Peterson to trace the vehicle's movements immediately. Within minutes, they discovered that the SUV had traveled down County Road M, the same road Lena had been on the night she disappeared. It seemed that someone had been following her. But the real shock came when the SUV's license plate was cross-referenced with the local DMV records. It was registered to none other than Thomas Fairchild. This revelation hit like a thunderclap. Thomas Fairchild, Lena's own father, was directly involved. Sheriff Graves had been piecing together a portrait of a man who had been hiding secrets. But this was something entirely different. The thought that Thomas might have been involved in his own daughter's disappearance was unthinkable, but the evidence was irrefutable. Without wasting another moment, the sheriff headed straight to the Fairchild estate, his mind racing with a mixture of disbelief and determination. Thomas Fairchild was at home when Graves arrived, but the man's demeanor was different this time. He wasn't the calm, collected businessman Graves had known for years. There was a nervousness in his eyes, a sense of panic that the sheriff hadn't seen before. As Graves entered the house, he could sense the tension thick in the air. Thomas wasn't just startled by the sheriff's arrival, he was visibly shaken, like a man who had just been cornered. Graves wasted no time. He confronted Thomas with the damning evidence, the black SUV, the surveillance footage, the connection to Lena's disappearance. For a moment, Thomas stood frozen, his face paling as if the walls were closing in on him. And then, just as the sheriff had expected, the truth began to spill out. Thomas's voice cracked as he confessed. Lena had uncovered the dark secrets of his past, the illegal dealings with Harold Wicks, the hidden stash of stolen goods, the debts that had spiraled out of control. Thomas had tried to protect her from the truth, to shield her from the fallout of his actions, but Lena had been determined to expose it all. She had confronted him, demanding answers, and when Thomas had tried to silence her, the confrontation had escalated. In a moment of panic and fear, he had done something unspeakable. He had taken his daughter. The confession shattered everything. Lena had been taken, not by a stranger, but by the person she had trusted most in the world, her own father. Thomas had tried to cover his tracks, to hide the truth from the town, but his guilt had been eating away at him. He had driven Lena to the old oak tree, a place that had once been a marker for the buried secrets of the past. He had planned to keep her hidden, to make her disappear. But something had gone wrong. Lena had fought back, and in the struggle, Thomas had lost control. The sheriff listened in stunned silence as Thomas explained the aftermath. Lena's body had been left near the oak tree, buried hastily, and Thomas had gone to great lengths to make it seem like she had vanished. The necklace, the note, the eerie trail of footprints, all of it had been part of Thomas's plan to mislead the investigation, to make sure no one would find the truth. As Sheriff Graves processed the confession, the enormity of it all began to sink in. The town of Ashford had been living under a veil of lies, and the person they had trusted the most, the man who had once been a pillar of the community, was the very one who had orchestrated the darkest crime the town had ever seen. The sheriff felt a deep, hollow anger, not just for Lena, but for the entire town that had been betrayed by someone they had all looked up to. In the end, the case was solved, but the resolution brought no comfort. Lena's body was recovered, and Thomas Fairchild was arrested for his daughter's murder. The town of Ashford, once filled with hope and pride, was left to pick up the pieces of a tragedy that would haunt them forever. The road to uncovering. The truth had been long and fraught with twists, but in the end, Sheriff Graves had brought justice to Lena, even as he mourned the loss of the innocence that had once defined the town.